Fast Forward Productions. The women are speaking.
This is Initiated Survivor, where we share survivors' voices and our stories of recovery and reclaiming our power. I'm Kelsey Harper. I'm a clinical psychologist and a survivor, and I like to share helpful tips and skills about recovery from trauma. As a community of survivors, we have tremendous power to change the world, so thank you so much for being here. Here we discuss stories and information that is relevant to survivors of gender-based violence and sexual violence. These topics may be triggering and are for adult ears only, so please be mindful of your needs throughout. Thank you everyone for being here. I have some pretty awesome guests today. They've been on the podcast before, both in individual episodes, so please go back and listen to those if you wish. But I'm going to introduce to you two very special people that do some really awesome, amazing work. I'm really excited to share that with everyone and share exactly how they can help survivors in trauma recovery, specifically around sexuality and intimacy. So first, Mistress Justine Cross is a professional BDSM consultant and queer lifestyle dominatrix. She owns Dungeon East. Justine is an educator, a provocateur, and all-around badass bitch. I can definitely attest to that as well. Justine offers classes in person, online, as well as private tutorials. She also hosts BDSM, a play party for cis and trans women, and co-hosts Chroma, a queer play party by invite only. Extensively interviewed and profiled, Justine has appeared in Los Angeles Magazine and Playboy and featured in Nylon, LA Weekly, Time Out Los Angeles, BuzzFeed, and Salon. She also has appeared as herself on A&E, Lifetime, Epix, VH1, and an upcoming remake of House Party. Please visit her website at losangelesdominatrix.com. And then we also have Rena Martine, who is an intimacy coach. Rena Martine is a former sex crimes deputy district attorney turned intimacy coach, TEDx speaker, and author of The Sex You Want. I also might argue also a badass
I'll
bitch
take
too.
it.
A regular contributor to Bustle and frequent guest on NBC, she empowers women and couples to embrace their sexuality and build deeper connections through a blend of neuroscience and coaching. Welcome, Justine and Rena. I'm so happy for you guys to be here and so grateful to have you on here, especially because I think that the two of you specifically are very specifically skilled and welcoming with how you present these different topics and how you engage in them in a very shame-free way, and have opened a lot of doors for a lot of people, myself included, around being able to engage with these different topics. And I wanted to bring you on to specifically focus on how people can engage in trauma-informed sexual practices or sensuality or intimacy. I think both of you have some excellent expertise in this and also offer a lot of support around this for people too. So the first thing that I was thinking about with talking is just even identifying like what is trauma-informed sexuality. And I can share from my perspective and then all of you can share also from yours. When I think about trauma-informed sexuality, trauma-informed is a phrase that we use a lot in the mental health community, specifically around that the people who are engaging with this topic are educated and informed on trauma and understand how it presents and are sensitive to those things. That doesn't necessarily mean that the practices or the skills or whatever activities there are specific to trauma healing, but are at least shaped a little bit to be understanding about trauma. And so when I think about sexuality being trauma informed or sexual engagement or sensuality being trauma informed, it's about entering some of these experiences in these spaces with a mind or an eye towards what might come up from our own traumatic histories or even just significant painful experiences around our lives, our intimate relationships, our bodies, that kind of thing. How does this show up in your different work?
I can start. After spending 14 years prosecuting sex crimes as a deputy district attorney, I've seen the gamut of how trauma truly impacts people and seeing some of the most horrific things you can imagine. And now in my practice as an intimacy coach and understanding the neuroscience of trauma, how it works, I'm able to not just talk about what happened, but give folks specific steps in order to create those new neural pathways. Because what I often say is trauma isn't something that was said and done to you, right? It's an event that happened, and we cannot talk or think think our way into resolving trauma. Unfortunately, there's a limit to how much we can do when it comes to journaling, when it comes to talk therapy. In order to actually change how our brains are wired, we have to do something different. Sometimes that something different is working with a pro dom like Mistress Justine Cross. And so my job now as a coach, especially when it comes to trauma survivors, is identifying, okay, how do we introduce that new and different opposite action in the smallest baby steps we possibly can so that we're not re-triggering, but we are rewriting and reshaping the traumatic experience.
Yes, thank you both for that really wonderful explanation because it makes what I'm about to say easier. Just, go see a pro dom, go see a sex worker. No, one of my degrees is in psychology, but I am not trained in trauma therapy. I am not a psychotherapist. My work is with my clients. Some of it is consultation based and some of it is hands on, not these little hands. But, I think for me and what I'm doing is that for a lot of my clients, they might have had a traumatic experience with another professional or a traumatic experience in youth that they're trying to rewrite, as Rena said. And then, of course, also because I'm doing a lot of things like classes and hosting events like BDSM and Chroma, it's also just providing a safe space for people who might have had a traumatic incident happen to them, at a BDSM space or not, having that rewrite of an experience of just being in that space. And I really love being able to provide that for people, whether you're playing or having sex or whatever. Sometimes it's just nice to be in a space where, okay, relatively certain nothing bad is going to happen to me and just sitting there. And that's just healing, just sitting on the couch and hanging out.
Yeah. I mean, I went to BDSM and stayed around for a very brief amount of time because my social anxiety was like, I don't know who to talk to here, but it can definitely attest to the feeling of safety at that space. That was something that struck me significantly, was not just the space that's held because it's all women and femme centered. And that was really, really powerful, but also there were people there that were kind of in charge of making sure everybody was okay, there to answer questions, support and help you, as well as do fun things with you. And everyone was invited to just do whatever felt right, even if that was just like stand around and observe and just hang out. And I think that can also be such a wonderful way that people can like dip their toe back in the water of engaging in sexuality and play and kink if they're interested in that too, can be, attending some of these parties just as they are.
Yeah, I mean, being a voyeur is totally an active participation. And I think that's also just nice. Like, something that I talk about like a lot with clients or when I'm doing other classes, like my funny class, like How to Survive the Holidays with Justine Cross, is like, well, where do we learn about relationships? We learn about relationships from our parents. And many people do not have like happy parent relationships. Why? Well, it has to do with like all kinds of economical and social, all these things. Just healthy modeling is nice. And just seeing how people interact. And like, I remember it was being able to see people, and you don't really always get inside other people's relationships because they're very intimate. So how do you see them in public spaces or maybe at like sex parties or something? And it's like just seeing how people treat each other and talk to each other and care about each other, and especially good queer and kink spaces, is just so amazing and healing. And then when you go into like the straight mono weirdo world, you're like, wait, why do you talk to each other like this? Well, actually, a lot of it is they don't talk to each other, but when they do, it's not good because it's all about boundaries and negotiations and consent. And that's forming the basis of really good relationships, whether they're sexual or not. And I'm sure, we all have very broad definitions of intimacy, as we should, because lots of different things can feel intimate or sexual, and certain things like sex don't always feel sexy.
And I will echo what Mistress Justine Cross said as somebody who has been to BDSM and Chroma multiple times, right? There's a chapter in my book called Find Your People. And I feel like going to events like this serves two functions. One is, oh my gosh, I'm not alone. If perhaps you have these kinks or you do feel like, what is wrong with me? I must be some deviant, right? In a negative way. So that can serve as a community space to resolve some of that shame and feeling alone. But also, as Justine said, in terms of providing new data for your brain that says, okay, wait a second. I had an experience where sex was done, or a sexual act or sexual abuse was done to me where I did not have a say in it. I wasn't able to negotiate, and there was no end scene, right? So even if you don't interact with what's going on, just be able to sit there and watch consent happen in front of you is sending that new data to your brain that says like, okay, there is consensual sex to be had, even if I'm not ready to participate in it, but it exists and it's there for me when I'm ready for it.
Yeah, absolutely. I like how that connects with what you said before about like really the healing power is going to come from experience, that experiencing these things, witnessing them, doing, engaging, participating in different ways, and what it feels like to feel like consensually participating in sexuality and curiosity around arousal and desire and things like that, and noticing those senses in the body in a space that's really safe and that's really well held for everyone and protected for everyone can be really, really transformative. And also, right, like that is impossible to do in just simply talking about things, although that can get people's foot in the door, hopefully, if they have an effective therapist, a sex positive therapist who's willing to talk to them about these things, of them being able to engage in those practices. And as you were describing that, I was like, oh my gosh, the three of us are like this little power team. I'll do the therapy. Rena does the coaching and setting up the skills practice, and Justine implements
There's a part of
everything.
it.
Yes, not all heroes wear capes.
I'm definitely wearing Louboutins.
So, looking at some of these things, what would you recommend? Like, how can people take a first step, second step, third step into this? The thing that I commonly hear from clients, and part of why I'm bringing this up is because after meeting with both of you, I pretty much like told everyone I knew about yours existence in the world and was like, these are some amazing humans. Everyone needs to learn from them. Everyone needs to talk to them. I'm not at all exaggerating when every single person pulled up your Instagrams and followed you right away, that everybody was very much interested and needing that support. And also at the same time, we're like, yeah, but I'm like way too scared to do anything. And I know that both of you have ways that people can engage specifically with you in very, very like kind of gentle, low risk ways. But even if they don't have access to be able to connect with you, like what can people do that kind of helps them start to approach really engaging or highly activating experiences, activating in a way that can also be very pleasantly activating experiences when they're ready to, kind of get their foot in the door, get started on some of that.
Well, I highly recommend Rena's book, The Sexy One, which is amazing, which is not just about sex, but you got to choose a sexy title. I've recommended that book to everyone because it does such a good job of talking about intimacy and talking about like how to get like that intimacy that you want and going through like, how did we get here? Because I think that's what we always need to talk about. What happened all before that got you to this place where things aren't feeling as good as you want them to be? I think another great book is Come As You Are, but that's a little bit more on the like a Debbie Downer kind of thing. I mean, it's like all true and it's all really good, but it's like a lot about trauma informed stuff. And it's like Rena's book to me is it does take part of that, which I think is important in your story to figure that out, but also just moving forward in terms of like really just getting the intimacy that you want. So we can all start with the book.
Oh my gosh. Thank you, Justine. And, obviously some people are at a place where they do want to work with a practitioner one-on-one, right? And if that's the case and you're looking for a coach to be there with you, please come to my website, find me on Instagram. I am there for you. But the reason I wrote this book was twofold. One, I believe that everybody should have access to help. Not everybody has the resources or bandwidth in their life to be able to work with somebody one-on-one. And so I thought, what is the lowest entry point that I could give people to give them access to pretty much all the tools that I use with my one-on-one clients? The lowest barrier of entry, lowest price point, and that's why I wrote this book. And also, you do it on your own terms, and that makes it a lot less scary for folks. But it is chock full of exercises and telling you how to do the damn thing. I put that in air quotes, but because a lot of folks are saying, well, you got to love yourself first, right? You got to have better communication. You've got to speak up for yourself in the bedroom. Okay, but how? How do I do that? And so giving you the conversation starters, like the actual go out and do this thing approach. Yes, of course, I'm going to recommend my own book too, but then in recommending, Justine's online classes, because that's another way where you can take these at your leisure. You can learn. It can feel a lot less scary or intimidating than going to a dungeon, or maybe you don't live in LA and you can't go to one of Justine's parties. So I think both of us, we have a wealth of baby steps and safe ways to allow people to start getting their hands on information in a way that feels approachable and not quite as scary.
I love those options. One of the ones that I also think can be really nice too is Justine hosts sound baths also at her dungeon. And so if you like really want a delicate foot in the door, I highly recommend that. I got to like lay down and meditate on a cage, and it was fantastic. And so I highly recommend those as well. So there's all kinds of events that are not even necessarily sex focused that will help anybody gain some exposure to this and start to get their mind rolling on that. Because I think, what we're also speaking to with that experience is necessary to carve those new neural pathways is also that a lot of people, especially when trauma, especially if it happened early on, and so their sexuality is primarily based and built upon experiences that were painful and traumatic and scary, have no idea how to even go about exploring what they like, what they want, how to even search for that. They may be interested in it. And things like exposure, of things like showing up at a dungeon and doing something like a sound bath to just kind of see what's there, to, look around, to feel the feels, that kind of stuff, as well as that, like, it calls in that community of other pretty awesome people that want to do a sound bath at a dungeon. A very, very unique, specific group, but awesome. I would highly recommend. It helps your brain start to unconsciously process all that information. As you sleep and you build those pathways, your brain then starts to come up with ideas of like, I wonder what this feels like. Curiosity starts to bloom. And through that curiosity, we can follow that into trying things out and testing things out. Hello, everyone. I wanted to jump on here real quick to let you know about some really awesome workshops I'm offering this fall of 2024. I love getting to connect with our greater community of folks, and these workshops are a great way for us to come together and take a moment to focus on some specific skills that can help us all immensely. So first off, I'm offering a workshop called Trauma Resourcing Skills. This is a 90-minute virtual workshop where I will teach everyone about the EMDR resourcing skills that help with trauma survivors in getting grounded when they're feeling triggered or overwhelmed, and are used in therapy sessions for trauma processing. These are not trauma processing techniques themselves, but are wonderful skills that will help us feel more at peace and grounded while we do hard therapy work. You will walk away from this one-time workshop with a full set of EMDR resource skills and know how and when to use them. You'll be able to practice these when you're triggered and use them in therapy to help streamline your trauma work. The other workshop I'm offering is called Trauma-Informed Intimacy Skills. This is a 90-minute live virtual workshop where we'll discuss core values around sexuality and intimacy and how trauma can impact this. And I will teach key skills to help regulate and soothe triggers related to intimacy so that you can connect with your body, your sexuality, and your partners in a way that feels fun and free again. These skills are helpful with anyone who has a trauma history, who struggles with their relationship with their own and others' bodies, or specifically has a history of sexual violence or relationship violence. This workshop is a safe and inclusive space. It is queer, trans, and relationship affirming, sex worker affirming and inclusive, kink informed and kink affirming, shame free, and confidential. To get more information on these workshops and to enroll, go to my website at drkelseyharper.com and click the workshops on the top of the menu, or go to drkelseyharper.com/store to enroll right now. Those links will also be down below in our show notes, as well as tagged in any of our different captions. And make sure to share this information with your friends. We never know who in our life may need support around trauma recovery and personal topics like intimacy. So share this on your socials with your friends. It may help someone get connected to something that they really need. Currently, right now, there's an early bird registration special running where folks can save 10% on registration fees, and seats tend to fill fast for these kinds of things. So I recommend hopping over there now if you think this might be helpful for you or for someone you know and care about. Sign up now, and I look forward to seeing you there. One of the things that I thought, and this kind of comes to a bit of a community question or a listener question that I have, I wrote it in a way that kind of speaks to broadly, generally, what I hear from people that have this specific question. And it's, I really want to have my partner dominate me, and my trauma involves having had control and power taken from me or used against me. My partner is afraid, and so am I, that power exchange is going to be too triggering. I'll end up associating my partner with my abuser. How can we prevent that? Or can we just never engage in power exchange? And the same also goes for age play and how that comes up as well. is that then, people follow their curiosity and then they get these blocks of like, okay, well, I'm curious about this, but that was actually harmful to me. Does that mean I'm a deviant, as you said, or is there something wrong with me? Is there something bad? And we really want to depathologize that. And that can definitely be something that, working with any of us would actually really help with. But also then how do I engage in it in a safe way? Is this an experience I want to have? Is this an experience I like? And in what way?
Yeah, well, I mean, to me, I think that the difference between an abusive situation and a hot, sexy one is the context and the consent. So you want to take away whatever happened in the traumatic experience and not bring that into the new sexy experience. So whatever that was, what is missing? It's like, well, we're going to negotiate what this scene is going to be. We are going to discuss what our likes and dislikes are. What are the limits? What are things that we are definitely not going to do? You are going to get a safe word or a series of safe words, like, using a traffic light system, green meaning go, yellow meaning slow down, red meaning stop. You are going to also be able to call it off at any time. You can stop this scene. And other things that I always recommend to people when they are having your good, fun, sexy experiences is all the different sensory things that are happening here. Are you like only playing a certain soundtrack? Are you only having incense or candles burning? So you are having all these different sensory experiences that are cementing you into this positive, awesome one. But I do think it's good and fun and safe to explore. And the power dynamic and control is hot as fuck when it's consensual. When it's not, of course, that's not BDSM, that is abuse. And so we want to really be careful about how you're going to do that. And the more you negotiate beforehand, the better that's going to be during the scene. And also, the other thing you could do is try shorter time when you are doing something. Like maybe you're only going to do it for 15 minutes, or maybe you're only going to do one act and see how it goes. You're only going to go as fast as the slowest person. And that's in poly, and that's in kink, and that's in so many different things. And I understand the fear of not wanting to re-traumatize yourself or traumatize your partner, but we got to go have fun, folks. We got to go try stuff. We got to get out there. We got to go do a thing. And like, it's probably going to be okay. Like maybe it won't be the best thing ever, but like, it's probably not going to be the worst thing ever as long as we do our homework and try to prepare it as much as possible. I don't know. I'm coming off of like an article I read this morning, like Gen Z is the anxious generation or something. And I'm like, can we just go out? Like, it's cool, And when Kelsey was saying, like, I was nervous, there's lots of introverts there too. Sometimes they all kind of congregate together. Like one party, my sub was like, I was like holding court in introvert sub central over here and everything. And again, not all parties are created equal. And I think a lot of people, me specifically, are very intimidated by me. I'm tall, I'm pretty, but I'm just like, hey, how's it going? And, I hope that people are finding events and places that people are friendly to you. But again, not all of them are. So it's another whole other topic. But I just encourage people to try stuff and just go early, try things.
Introverted sub central sounds like the best place for me.
I'm going to put you all in different cages.
Oh, yeah. Just sit there and enjoy the alone time. I like also what you're saying about that BDSM and abuse is wildly different, and that oftentimes the links that are being made between those two things are by people that are wanting to disparage BDSM or wanting to really emphasize purity culture, but that we can have trauma triggers around any kind of sensation. But like, I like what you're speaking to, that like the consent and the way that we plan around it and we're engaging with it and the goal around it of like, we're all enjoying ourselves, we're exploring, we're playing, we're having fun, already sets us up to have a very, very different experience. And that's also what makes it just starkly different than abusive situations.
Echoing what Justine said in terms of how can we then begin to explore this safely. In my book, there's a chapter called Give Your Trauma a Home. And I suggest that folks remove the X factor that made it dangerous in the first place. And I go through a lot of examples of how to do that. Okay, so say you're in a relationship, as the person who posed this question is, Kelsey, how do you request that your partner start dominating you? I will say just you're normal. 93% of women and the overwhelming majority of men have had sexual submission fantasies. So you're completely normal in that regard. And figuring out, okay, how can I begin to request things that maybe don't even involve domination or what we would consider to be BDSM as a starting point? Hey, I'm going to start by just initiating sex. I don't suggest that people go from pure vanilla. And usually my partner instigates to, okay, now we're going to like bust out the whips and chains. It's the new data. It's saying, hey, how about for the next week, I be the one to initiate sex? That's new data coming to your brain. Okay, this is safe. All right, hey, I'm going to purchase a BDSM implement, like some sort of accessory, whether those are cuffs or, whatever the case may be. I'm going to purchase it and I'm going to request that you use it on me. Or I'm going to put on an eye mask and surrender just a little bit of control where I'm not restrained or bound in any way. So it's just those baby steps. I have probably used the car accident analogy on this podcast before, but if you got into a terrible car accident on the freeway, the worst thing you could do is get behind the wheel of a car and go back on the freeway because that has a high likelihood of re-triggering you. So instead, baby steps, right? Sit behind the wheel of the car. Take the car around the block for a spin. And then, maybe you drive a few city blocks and then, you build up to going back on the freeway. The same thing when it comes to sex is just breaking it down into beats and taking the first step that you possibly can. And that could look like purely initiating vanilla sex and then building up from there.
I love that. That's so helpful with the step by step.
I just want to add one more thing. As always, Golden Girls has the perfect quote for this. This is from Dorothy. The bottom line is if you take a chance in life, sometimes good things happen, sometimes bad things happen. But honey, if you don't take a chance, nothing happens.
Yes, absolutely. I think also that, and this is something that both of you mentioned before too, about taking a step in these directions is starting to replace traumatic memories with positive ones. The trauma is never going to be erased or undone. And also, it does not have to be and will not be the only experience that you have with your body, with people, with relationships, with all of that kind of stuff. And that the more and more that you can engage in some of these things, specifically things that feel like they are oddly similar, whether that's age play or power exchange, that kind of stuff, is a bit of reclaiming some of that sensory experience, some of that sensual experience, sexual experience in a way that is about pleasure and about joy and about playfulness instead of about abuse or violence. And I think that can also be incredibly powerful and really, really helping people feel so much more, in themselves and with themselves. Start doing. And if you don't have a partner, start with yourself.
Yeah. That's what I love about being a coach is that I can give people homework and hold people accountable for the homework. And it's homework that, we co-create, but that's what I love doing is coming up with, well, what does the babyest step look like for you? Are you partnered? Are you unpartnered? What are you looking for? And how do we craft that perfect step for you individually?
I love that too. That's kind of like where it can be so nice to work with an intimacy coach is because it's like also this nice middle path between doing nothing and working with like a pro dom of like, okay, I can start to have this experience of someone holding space for this that feels like maybe a little bit lower risk and start to experience having these conversations and sharing with somebody what I feel, what I want, that kind of stuff. So I wanted to ask a couple of questions, more community or listener questions that I think are really important and helpful. How about this? When I do certain things in sex, I dissociate or get triggered. How can I make that stop so I can still do these things and enjoy them again? One of the things that comes to my mind when I think about this is that we first have to accept that dissociation and triggers are going to happen. They won't always happen and they won't always be intense or interfering, but that moving more towards like, it's okay for these things to happen and how do I make space for this? I think Rena, you were talking about that of like, how do I give my trauma a home? Like how do I welcome this into this space, but how do I care for this? Similar to what you were saying, Justine, of using the traffic light and the safe words, like how do I communicate with people? What are we going to do when I feel dissociated and when I feel triggered? What's the next step? How do we take that turn in the experience?
One thing I always suggest is when the triggers are coming up for you, take a moment and dissect what ingredients are at play here. It's almost like if you ate something you had an allergic reaction, you'd be like, all right, was it the cheese? Was it the meat? Right? You would look at the ingredients. So I had a client who had survived years of spousal rape, essentially non-consensual sex with her partner. And she had met this new guy, really great, but every time they would start having sex, she would just shut down. And she came to me saying, does this mean I'm never going to be able to enjoy sex again? And the answer was no. But I asked her, okay, well, what is happening right before the moment that you shut down? When is this happening? She said, it happens when he either starts taking off my clothes or when I'm in missionary position. So what did we do? We said, all right, for the next indefinite future, tell him I would like to be the one to take my own clothes off, and let's take missionary off the table. That only needed about 2 weeks. And then she was, I'm going to say fine, I'm putting that in air quotes, but she got to the point where she was then requesting, okay, no, I'm actually good. Like, can you take off my clothes? Can we do missionary position? This was a few years ago. She and I are still in touch. She's still having great sex. She and this person are now engaged, and so happily ever after. But this doesn't need to take forever. But it wasn't so much that sex was the thing triggering her. It was these beats, these ingredients. And so start by identifying what those ingredients are and then reverse engineer from there.
It's so great. Also, it highlights how effective and powerful exposure work is, particularly when it is safe and contained and gentle, like in this graduated way, like you're talking about, Rena, that when we're not flooding and we're not overwhelmed, this person, it took them 2 weeks of practicing that for that to actually completely change. Our brain is so flexible, so changeable. And it's really cool. It just is that, like, if you notice you still are hitting a wall with whatever the exposure activity is, that means it's too big, and break it down into smaller pieces.
I think that's really great. And I don't have anything specific to add other than just please expand your view of what sex and intimacy is, because just hearing like those two things, like missionary, like penis and vagina sex, like there are so many different kinds of sex and intimacy, and they are all valid. I want people to have the best sex and intimacy that you can possibly have. There's just so many different ways to do that, whether that does involve your genitalia or someone else's, or kink or not, or being monogamous or not. There are just so many different ways to feel good in our bodies. And as you were both saying, to like start with yourself first. I'm very pro masturbation and all of that, and understanding like your intimacy and like what you want and what your fantasies are, because it really does need to come from yourself first, because you're in a relationship with yourself first. And so it doesn't matter if you're dating or partnered or not, like you need to understand yourself first. The problems I sometimes get into like with other people is like, I really know what I want and what I don't want. A lot of people do not. So I think it's really important to really spend some time with yourself and like, maybe light those candles or journal, or like fill out like one of those maybe no sheets. Or I have a couple of really great like kink negotiation free worksheets on my website that are just kind of like, wait, what do I want? What do I not want? And really like understanding that, and also understanding that that might change, and it should change. It's going to change. Where are we now from our sexual journey from like 5 years ago to certainly like not when we started, whenever that was. Like that's going to be different, and it should be different as our tastes expand, or we say, oh, I don't like this anymore or anything. What's really fun about my profession is I get to see all kinds of different fun stuff all the time. And it's expanded my view tremendously. And my view was already expanded. I had access to HBO in the 90s and all that. I was watching MTV and Real Sex and all that. So I was like, oh, okay. And that's cool. I really invite everyone to have a rich sexual experience, with intimacy experience with themselves, and understanding what it is that they want, and the sensuality of things that are not even just sexual. Like, I'm really enjoying this fine chocolate bar, like on my balcony or whatever. Those things are really nourishing for yourself.
Yeah, I really like how you highlighted also, like, one, that sex itself is such an expansive term that can include so many things, but also that, engaging with ourselves and with others in sensual ways, in intimate ways, does not have to involve things that we would consider to be sex or sexuality. That can still help us get connected to that part of ourselves, about understanding and experiencing our physical sense, our sensories, and the sense of like tasting something, smelling something, feeling a sense of touch, that kind of stuff, and just starting to tolerate those experiences and rebuild some of the new neural networks around that, of just even experiencing pleasure and what that's like. And I really like that idea. I think as both of you are talking, it kind of brought up this other question that I've heard, and this tends to be in the straight monogamy world, which is like, why would this be important to learn about? As a survivor of compulsory heterosexuality, and also said the other side of this is much more fun, guys. But what is the value of learning about sex and sexuality, about our own sex and sexuality? Like, why would that be important?
I mean, okay. Like, big picture here, sex is one of life's greatest joys that's absolutely free. You know what I mean? Like it's something, and if we're talking about how to reconcile female pleasure with religion, okay, our bodies were built with a part whose sole function is pleasure, our clitoris. It serves no other biological function. We don't need it to pee. We don't need it to have babies. So reminding yourself that pleasure is your birthright and orgasms are really good for you. They help with sleep, they help with pain reduction, they reduce our cortisol levels. They're nature's free multivitamin that feel really, really good. Sex can be a way that you express yourself, like singing or dancing, right? It's a way that you can connect with other people. I think for folks who are survivors, it's this thing where it hasn't been fun. And perhaps there is this idea that it can't ever be fun again. And I'm a survivor here, a survivor of both sexual trauma and compulsory monogamy and compulsory heterosexuality. But there's just so much on the other side of this if you give yourself permission to open the door.
I love that, really emphasizing like you could enjoy yourself and have fun, especially like the expressing yourself. This is something that for me, I know has been really important is connecting with creativity and seeing how much of that comes in like very different ways. That it's not just like the traditional like painting or writing or singing, but it can be things like, I'm pretty witchy. So I like doing like witchy rituals and stuff like that. Sex magic, guys. So much fun. Highly recommend. But that also has become another way of expressing myself too, is with witchy stuff and magic stuff, as well as many other things. And that sex and sexuality, especially when we look at it from this like whole kaleidoscope of possibilities of what it is and what it can be, gives like such this beautiful space to experience yourself and others, connect with others, and express
And
yourself
play.
too.
I mean, very few of us as grown-ups are playing enough. And we all remember what the benefit was of playing. For those of us who are parents, we know the importance of play when it comes to our kids, especially if we're talking about survivors of trauma. You might feel like some of your childhood and that ability to play was taken from you. And I'm here, to remind you that you are allowed to play. Play is really good for our soul. And sex is such a great way to play. Like what you're saying, Kelsey, the scenarios I come up with in my deranged brain when it comes to sex, I'm like, wow, Rena, where did you come up with that? And I'm like, I don't know. It's my creativity at play here. But yeah, just seeing this as a form of play, first and foremost, I think is so healing.
I mean, and also that like sexuality and intimacy and pleasure, like this is just part of the human experience. There's cave drawings of BDSM and, as long as there's been feet, there's been a foot fetish and we've erased a lot of things, gender, pleasure and all this stuff. I assume Christianity, I don't know if anyone else was in on this. A lot of this just gets erased like through the patriarchy and certain religions to keep people down and keep them miserable. And that's not the reality. The Kama Sutra is like, has been around a long time. I think that in a lot of ways we're just have pleasure. It feels really good. Yeah, I know it's very important. I remember seeing when I was seeing acupuncturists, they talked about like how sex is important. They're like, sex is important to your overall health. Masturbation is part of that. This is part of a healthy human experience and it feels good. Sometimes I'm around people. I was just talking to people at the event like last week or whatever, and I'm around like other people who I'm friends with that aren't like in this world and they're older and they're not like having the best time ever. And I look out at so many different events and people I know, and they're just going for it and having the best time ever. One of the things I say to people is like, hey, if you ask for it, you're much more likely to get it. You might not, but like you're gonna get it maybe. Like, but if you don't ask and you're sitting there by the corner, like that's also an experience to watch it all unfold. But just asking for what you want. And that's why it's important to let yourself know like what it is you want and what it is you don't want. And there is going to be a trial and error, but the more you do in the front end of like negotiations and check-ins and consent, like you won't fall so hard. You'll fall on the nice cushy foam mat playground.
And I think that's also coming back to like, adults don't really get a lot of spaces to play. And it's like, when was the last time, that you felt this is for the audience? When was the last time that you felt that kind of abandon and being playful and that joy and stuff like that? This is definitely a way of doing that and way of exploring that and bringing that back into life. It's not something that you owe to anybody, but it's something that, like Rena said, your birthright, and it's something can be so fun. And again, about like really being present in the present moment for folks that love the mindfulness, sex and sexuality, sensuality, intimacy are wonderful and beautiful mindfulness practices as well. And also help us kind of live in the moment. Like we're only here once. Well, before we wrap up, I would love to have both of you, if you're open to it, to share a lot about what you offer and all the different things that people can do. I'm very familiar, so I also might plug a few things that I know about what both of you offer, in part because, like I said, I've recommended you to pretty much every single person I know, and they all follow you, but are not doing anything with you guys. And you have like just so much abundance of resources and wisdom and wonderful, wonderful things. People get intimidated because they're scared of this kind of stuff. And it's just like, no, these are literally the nicest humans you've ever met. So, Justine, why don't we start with you? Like, what are the different things that you offer, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah. And I just want to tell everyone, if you are too afraid or not in a financial position to support our business, just constantly like and share our socials. We're shadow bananaed, both me, Rena. I don't know about Kelsey, but just please engage with our content, if nothing else. But in terms of the services I offer, my website is losangelesdominatrix.com. I do BDSM consultant work if you just want to talk through things. I also will see people in person as well as for online BDSM stuff. I also run Dungeon East, and you can rent that space with me, without me. And there's also a lot of classes that I offer both live in person, as well as a lot of things that are also recorded that you can purchase there as well. So if you're listening and you're in Los Angeles, I also run BDSM, which is the play party for cis and trans women, as well as co-hosting Chroma, the play party for all queers. And yes, people will talk to you. I will talk to you. If it's like after midnight, I won't talk to you. But like I am very nice. Everyone there is very nice. Kelsey, you better come back and talk to people, or we'll put you in the cage with the other introverted subs.
And I'll probably be there. Look for the woman with pink hair.
Yeah.
Justine, I wanted to say I've been to some of Justine's classes. I highly recommend, like they are accessible for everyone at any level. So if you already know some kink stuff or you know a lot about yourself, it's still a great space where you can learn new things, where you can get just some space to pause and think about stuff, get some good tools. If you've never heard of any of this stuff before, excellent classes as well. And they're available online. So if you want to attend from the privacy of your home, video off, code name, whatever it is that you want, you definitely can. But it literally will start with like, what is a sub? What is a dom? And then you get to build up from there. And it's really cool. So I highly, highly, highly recommend, and with your consulting services, this is something like people can individually schedule with you if they're wanting to learn more, they're wanting to talk something through with you. Couples, partners, relationships of all kinds could also do that. Particularly, like I think about one of the questions before of how do we engage in power exchange, or how do we engage in age play? Like you do not have to figure that out by yourself. There is an expert. I'm a Virgo, so I'm like, consult the experts. Why? Don't reinvent the wheel. Justine is an excellent expert in this and is incredibly wonderful and helpful with this. And there's no dumb questions. There's no shame to have, like really, really open. And also like the dungeon that you rent, as someone who's newly initiated into the kink world, this is a really special thing. I think personally, I've never rented it myself, but I look forward to the day that I can. But, this is actually a space that like you and your partners can rent out and play with and use. And so if you don't necessarily want to connect with Justine or with other people or come to a party, you and your partners can rent out the space and explore it at your own leisure so that you don't also have to have all the tools and the stuff. This is something that you can also go to a space that has that set up for you. And Rena, you have a book that everyone can read, and it's also on Audible too.
It's in all the formats. So hopefully you enjoy the sound of my voice because I was the one who narrated it. Paperback, audiobook, ebook. I do have a free resource on my website. So if you go to renamartine.com, it's a quickie 10-minute audio guide that you can listen to at your leisure. If you're somebody who kind of needs to reset your sex drive, that's what that is there for. I also offer one-on-one coaching to women in the form of my Shameless Coaching program. I do customized couples mentorship as well. I have a few other offers that are going to be coming up. So the best way to stay in touch with workshops and that type of thing is to hop on my website, make sure you're on my email list, or follow me on Instagram.
Absolutely. Yay. And Rena, we mentioned this at the very beginning of being a deputy district attorney, some badassery hero there for all of us. So you're definitely safe with her, talking with her about any and everything that has happened. And so someone who's been engaged in recovery work from all different angles. So that's really wonderful. I have a virtual workshop that's coming up the end of October that is all about trauma-informed skills, specifically for sexuality and intimacy. So this is how to do certain things with regulating your emotions, how to manage triggers, how to be aware of triggers, and how to proceed in a way that feels safe and effective. That's going to be online, so it's accessible to everyone. And for anyone who's wanting to engage in non-sexually focused content with trauma-focused stuff, I have also another virtual workshop happening the end of October for trauma-focused skills. Thank you so much for both of you being here. It was so lovely to meet with you again and to get to connect with you. I feel like the badassery level in this space right now is just through the roof, which is always fun and amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to Sam Valentine and her team at Fast Forward Productions for editing, producing, publishing, and all-around podcast magic that makes this podcast possible. If you found something that resonated with you, please rate and review on your favorite podcast platform. This simple but meaningful action really helps increase the visibility and accessibility of this podcast to survivors and allies that may be looking for some support and connection. I love connecting with listeners and allies, so please feel free to share this episode on your socials and go ahead and tag me in it at Initiated Survivor or at Kelsey J. Harper. A final but very important note. While I am a clinical psychologist, this episode and this podcast does not constitute professional mental health care or therapy, nor is it a replacement for professional therapy. This podcast is for entertainment purposes only. The podcast host and the guests are not rendering professional advice and should not be considered to have developed a professional relationship. If you are looking for mental health care or professional help, please seek it out. We have some links in the show notes that may help you with that, or you can contact your insurance carrier directly for referrals.